Hello, and welcome to Untold Wealth, where we speak about wealth untold. My name is Vince Bullock.
And my name is Devon Murphy.
And we're here to enlighten, educate, and all around chat about the wonderful and engaging world of economics, finance, history, and just bring to light some of the more fascinating tales that exist in that space. Today, you know what? Let's start with a quote.
Very fancy.
Yes, as Mark Twain famously said, during the gold rush, it's a good time to be in the pick and shovel business. And let me tell you, diving deep into this topic of gold, that is, I don't think there was ever a time where being in the pick and shovel business was not a good idea. Gold has been this seemingly eternal thing, the symbol of status throughout civilization that's just permeated and been ever present. And looking through the things, God, fuck, is this good? Does this make sense?
No, this is great. I was actually going to interject and say we haven't really spoken about what our topic is here. It's obviously to do with gold, but how Vince and I have been, coming up with topics and stuff is we write down a sentence and we say, does this sound good? Could we chat about this in two varying perspectives and give some insights and, have some banter, tell each other we're stupid or something's interesting?
Exactly.
And that sentence for this particular episode of the podcast, Untold Wealth, if we do need to repeat it, is what's the deal with gold? Pirates, Fort Knox, leprechauns, everyone wants it. So that is very much what we're going to discuss today is this idea of gold. Why does it have value? Why has it had value? Why does it have value today? And should it? It could be an existential question. It could be philosophical. We don't know. Both Vince and I just decided on that topic sentence, and we both went at it with all we had. In general, how we're probably going to do things is Vince is going to tackle the historical aspects of our topic sentences and general topics, and I'll probably do more of the contemporary stuff, but there will more than likely be a lot of overlap in both of our research. And if there is overlap, that's fine. We'll both talk about the same things and we'll have nuanced perspectives regardless. And if there's no overlap, we'll both learn things that we didn't know going into the podcast. So that's the general idea. Obviously, we want this financial and economic twist to it. I was actually discussing this with Josie, my girlfriend, and I think we just want it to be palatable for someone who doesn't have a financial or economic background. If you don't know, both Vince and I have studied economics, not to a great extent. I mean, we got our bachelor's degrees, and we were both very interested. It is something. It's something, but that's also part of why we want to do this podcast. Is someone doesn't have to have formal education to understand this and find it interesting. So I think that's where we'll start, Vince, is really making it palatable for people who just want to hear cool stories and how modern day and historical economics has developed.
Yeah, and in addition to being palatable, hopefully also engaging, and hopefully throughout the course of this, however long it is, you'll kind of have a shared fascination, as Devon and I do, about economics and its evolution throughout the time that we've existed on Earth. But yeah, gold is a very fascinating topic, and as Devon mentioned, this time, as I usually will, I tackled a little bit of the historical side, and there's a lot of history with gold. It's been kind of the status symbol for thousands of years. Many civilizations have revered gold and had it as a mainstay of their empire. You got the Malis, the Ghana, or the Gold Coast in Africa, and the one that I chose to dive into for this topic of conversation, the ancient Andean civilization. Do you have any idea what that is?
I have no idea what that is. Spell that out for me. Andean? Andean?
Andean. Andean.
All right. Never heard of that.
So this kind of civilization it covered South America, more specifically where modern-day Peru, Bolivia, parts of Ecuador, Chile, in Argentina.
Mm.
There's like a range of mountains on the western side of South America that this empire or collection of civilizations took hold on. And they, much like the other empires that I mentioned, used their wealth of gold for many different purposes. There's some estimates that Incans, specifically, the Great Incan Empire, had about 6,000 metric tons of gold and silver to their name. Do you want to guess?
That is roughly what is in Fort Knox at the moment. I think around 6,700 tons is in Fort Knox. At the height of the gold standard, it was about 12,000. But that's just a nugget of information for you. Pun intended. Go on.
It's fascinating. Like, assuming that half of that was gold and the other half was silver, that makes about the same amount of gold that Germany has in its reserves today, which is the second largest holder of gold. Do you want to guess?
So they were rich. They had a lot of gold.
A lot of gold. Do you want to guess currently who's the largest holder of gold?
In my research, I know that India consumes the most gold. He makes it into jewelry, but I believe it's still the US.
Yeah, United States.
Yeah.
With about 8,000 metric tons of gold.
Yeah.
And, got to represent... Do you want to guess where South Africa helms in that ranking?
I know that 40% of all gold produced has come from South African rocks.
Sure.
Other than that, no. I don't think we hold gold. I think we're chucking it all away so we can have some money. I don't think we're holding a lot of it.
You assumed correctly. We're 31st, more or less.
That makes sense, because you'd expect us to have some gold if we're producing it, but it is definitely not our, prerogative to be keeping it. We definitely want to boost our exports, and gold is for sure up there in terms of our exports. Okay, so that lines up.
Absolutely. So a lot of gold. So centering back to the Incan Empire and this region, this ancient Andean region, gold was a very prominent part of their society. Like, we're talking at the top, you had priests who adorned themselves in jewelry and had precious items made of gold. They obviously used it to finance certain things, military conquests, decorations for religious buildings, and just as a desirable status symbol. The Incans especially were really good at gold metallurgy. But even at the bottom level of society, the Incans still use gold in everyday lives to connect with gods. The sun god in Incan culture, Inti, was associated with the sun, and gold as well. And they made a lot of really fascinating items, tapestries, gold ornaments. Even there was a special knife called the Tumi knife, that in most cases was made out of copper and silver, but more prestigious individuals sometimes made theirs out of gold, which were mainly used in human sacrifices to the very gods that I mentioned beforehand. Yeah, you gotta love the Incans. But interestingly enough, they didn't really use it as a currency, at least at first. It was more of a symbol of power, kind of like a gold-plated Rolex today, more or less. But
I think, just to add on to that, I mean, there's two things I want to add, but I think currency was a very late development in the lifespan of gold. Gold was very much dug out the ground, make something cool with it, because gold has a number of unique properties. But, what was probably most unique was its malleability, but also that it had very high resistance, obviously still has high resistance to corrosion. It was this everlasting sun-depicting material that was perfect for reverence of your chosen god, or your chosen emperor or kingdom. That's partially why gold was worth stuff. That's the deep question we're trying to understand: is why was gold worth anything? Before gold was even used as a currency, gold was just inherently worth. It could be because it was scarce. It could be because it was just pretty. Could be because it never corroded. You could put it on your mantelpiece and it would still retain its shimmer and shine, to a certain degree.
For generations.
Almost for generations. And that was, I mean, if you look at feudal civilizations, I'm sure that was massive for them. I mean, having an heirloom, something to revere your god for generations of your family, or a church or shrine. I'm sure they picked up on it quite quickly. But was it worth it? Every time we bring up some interesting fact about gold, just keep that in the back of your mind, because we don't really know the answer today, and that'll be it'll just keep it in your mind, because we don't know the answer. We can only just give you some information about it.
Yeah.
But go on.
It was very clear that even though it had a lot of uses, people saw value in it, and people really wanted it, to the point of wars and such. But it wasn't really used as a currency for quite a while. In the case of the Andean societies, it was that symbol of power. And beforehand, bartering was more of the thing that people did, exchanging goods and services for other goods and services or items. But as things began to be more complex, and we're talking about a range of...
Yeah, just remind me when this Andean Empire was formed. Like, how many BCs are we talking?
Right, so the Andean... It wasn't really an empire, it was just a collection of societies. The Incan Empire was probably the most famous of them, and there we're talking about 1400 CE.
Yeah.
Just on the cusp of when Spain decided to come voyaging west towards the Americas. But yeah, before gold was used, there was also the fact that people traded shells and beads and such. There's a very interesting shell that I found that was traded by the Moche culture. It's almost like a porcupine, but apparently it was held as a sacred artifact as well. The other thing that was super interesting that I found, that in addition to later, when gold was being introduced as a form of currency in the Incan Empire, which is the latter half of this Andean society, labor taxation was one of the more prominent uses of currency. And what I mean by that is work was being done for goods and services. If someone needed a road to be built or a building to be erected, they would petition citizens to work on it, and then they'd essentially have this tax redistribution, and people would kind of have almost this community income that they would receive for doing work, which is super interesting. But while that was also prominent, gold became a part of the currency in the Incan Empire specifically. And that grew and grew and grew to the point where when the Spaniards started chatting with the Andeans, trading and such, that exploded. And the rest is a little bit dark, but that's history for you, I suppose. But nevertheless, it's one of those stories where the lust for gold, I suppose, really is beyond comprehension.
Yeah, I mean, this whole gold is quite definitely paved with a lot of blood throughout history. I mean, it is incredible what we'll do for it, and it's just why. I can't wrap my head around it, because even at this stage, there were times when gold was not used as a medium of exchange. It was just valued, as just a good. And only nowadays, well, I mean, recently, gold stopped being a medium of exchange. It is now quite simply just a store of value and used for, some modern day applications in industry and jewelry, of course. Yeah. It's just very, very, very interesting.
Go ahead.
No, this was something I was going to bring up a bit later, but there's this term in economics, all right? And I thought I coined it. I came up with it in my head. I was like, this is amazing. There's no way, I was like, there's no way someone's thought of it. But then I thought, actually, listen, it's quite a simple thought. I coined this phrase, or I thought I coined this phrase, economic inertia.
Sure.
But it's very much real. It's very much real, economic inertia.
Could you explain that?
If you've known inertia, It's the resistance to change and motion. Economic inertia is just the resistance to change from an economic status quo. All right. And obviously, you can easily relate that to gold, because ever since gold has been discovered, it has been worth something. And
Right.
the more we know about gold, the more we know we attributed that worth to its religious, symbolism and its scarcity. But something that's scarce and had symbolism in the past, doesn't necessarily have it in the present. It's as much as it has some interesting applications. We only knew about those applications, towards the end of the 20th century. Maybe early, like late 19th century.
Mm.
We didn't know it could be used for cell phone production. We didn't know it could be used as a reflective quality in the James Webb Telescope. But the value for gold persisted. And very much nowadays, gold is seen as this safe haven outside of normal economic value, and it is seen as a store value that will never lose its value. It will always be persistent, and if everyone believes that, that will be the case. I mean, that is quite literally the cornerstone of behavioral economics. That's why bubbles exist, because economic inertia persists long after things are proven, or not even proven, to be told that it's not actually worth as much as it is, guys.
Yeah.
So this can relate to your favorite company. You can have economic inertia. You could hold stocks in your favorite company for years and years and years, but you see the first balance sheet where they're not doing well, and they might, doing well, and their income and their assets aren't reflective necessarily positively. You're more than likely to keep invested in that company, even though it would probably be the most rational choice to leave it. But that's human beings. This resistance to change or economic inertia is just so prevalent in gold, because gold it's everlasting. We can see it in cultures that we didn't know existed until very recently in our human lifespan. And I think, even thinking about that going forward, you just see gold so differently. I mean, I have a bit of a pessimistic view to it. I think it's like a waste of, why are people investing in their value in this random thing when there's, human beings and companies and things that are doing amazing stuff.
I was going to ask,
it's very much,
like, what is your perception of gold? What does that mean to you exactly?
I mean, I haven't even come to the decision. I quite like that it can be used to safely store your money. Gold will roughly have the same value in US dollars over the years. In fact, you see it spike when political tensions rise in the world. The price increases because people are getting more of it. I mean, there was a sharp increase when the Ukraine-Russia invasion took place. The Russian invasion of Ukraine took place. Whenever there's political tension, people flock to gold. It's been ingrained in our society for more. It is the most historically valuable material out there. I mean,
yes.
It's crazy.
Without a doubt.
Without a doubt. There's so much history behind gold, and that pushes it to being, in my opinion, so overvalued in today's society. Even though, obviously, the innovations have come with it. Like, I'm not saying it's not supposed to be worth nothing, but there's other materials out there that have much more applicability. And are not worth as much as gold. And I just thought that's just such an interesting thought, because that's not really the case for many things in the world. Many things in the world, the bubble bursts after 2 or 4 years. I mean, the global financial crisis, the bubble always ends up bursting. The bubble has never bursted for gold.
No.
Gold has just gotten more valuable. And you know what? Maybe we need that value. Maybe we need that surefire, long-lasting existence to gold. This gold that will never cease to exist. I mean, when I was researching this, all the gold that is, or almost all the gold that has ever been mined, is still in circulation to this day. Is in a gold bar somewhere.
That's incredible.
Some person's it's in some person's heirloom in their attic. It is still in existence, and maybe humans just very much like that idea of, why don't I invest in something that will be here long after I am but a coffin in the ground? I mean, and you can find some comfort in that. You can be a little bit, weirded out by it, like I am. Maybe you have a lot of gold yourself, and you're like, haha, I want to keep it like that. That's cool. Yeah, I don't have much more to add.
It's quite interesting because gold, it has this intrinsic relationship with people, almost like Neolithic and the older, like pre-humans, tamed dogs. Gold was kind of this partner, the status of wealth for many, many generations. And it does feel that even after 600 years, or I guess even before the ancient Andean empires and societies, like gold was a very prominent thing. And maybe it's just kind of out of stubbornness or just a cultural norm that's persisted throughout these many, many generations, that gold has just with us. It's along for the ride, and we have this faith in it. Like, even though gold is a very beautiful metal, and people prescribed it to this religious deity such as Inti, or whatever other religious connotations it has. Like, even though there's no religious deity that we use gold to tribute to, the faith we have in gold is almost like to a god. We're always sure that it's there.
Yeah.
It's this foundation that, as you said, is kind of like this backbone.
Like, I don't know if it's healthy. Like, is it healthy as a society? Do we need it to be healthy as a society? I don't know. At one point, it was very much used in society. I mean, I'd love to start talking about some more contemporary examples, but I obviously want you to finish up just chatting more about its history. But I'm not too sure. I mean, the gold standard existed for quite a long time in English history, as well as, in United States history.
Yes.
Almost all of the world was running on gold. It was pegged to gold, or it only had gold as a medium of exchange for so long. But now it just doesn't. But now its value is even greater. It is very, very odd to me. It is fascinating, but it just strikes me as something that can't be healthy. But I'm not too sure. Perhaps that's me obsessing about why people are obsessed about gold, and that doesn't sound very healthy either.
Right. I mean,
you know what?
It's been less than 100 years since the US went off like the gold standard. So it's, I think, fairly easy to understand why people are still there. There's this term gold bugs for people who just flock to investing in gold because it is this backbone, I suppose, when things start going up and down with interest rates and inflation.
But I told this to Vince before we started the podcast, actually. I mean, I know this is cheating a little bit. It's supposed to be such a massive surprise to him. I apologize. But at one point, gold was set as $35 to a troy ounce. And this troy ounces is just a bit of terminology for precious metals. It's just slightly more than a normal ounce. It's about 1.1 times a normal ounce. Don't ask me why. It has something to do with a French merchant city called Troyes. It was $35 per troy ounce. Now it is just under $2,000 per troy ounce. And that is after the gold standard.
Right.
Or semi after the gold standard, I suppose. Because the gold standard, weirdly enough, was, it kind of existed post 1933 when the US did some things. It's actually very juicy stuff, very draconian in how they kind of stopped the gold standard existing. But that is not a slight increase. That's not like, let's just store it for our own value. That is like, let's hoard this money. Like, let's put even more faith in it. Even after the world was not backed, even after the world's currencies were not backed by gold. Now it is just a store of value. It is something to make jewelry out of and sell it expensively and look pretty. That's all gold is now. It's not used to, give $5 to the merchant down the road and get a new carpet for your tapestry or whatever. It is just a store of value. So yeah, should I start discussing that whole history in gold and the gold standard? Because
I'm very interested. Yeah.
It was what I was drawn to. I mean, firstly, this phrase, the gold standard. You know, stupidly enough, I did not think it had a real, history to the phrase. I thought, oh, gold was normal. Obviously, gold standard sounds like a normal phrase to,
Seems pretty intuitive, yeah.
Yeah, encapsulate something that a high standard you should hold yourself to. But the gold standard essentially was countries pegging the wealth or the value of their banknotes, their currencies, to a set amount of gold. It literally, you could go to a bank, you could say, hey, my $1 gives me 1/500th of an ounce of gold. I want that gold. And that was the gold standard. Because that $1 signified a specific amount of gold, they had to give you the gold because that's what their economy was based on. The opposite of gold, the gold standard, I suppose, would be fiat money, which is what today's monetary systems are based on. And fiat just means lawfully declared.
Yes.
Right now, the single dollar in your hand only holds value because it is lawfully declared as that country's currency. I mean, it is as simple as that. But it wasn't always the case.
It's kind of scary to realize that like the money you hold in your hand isn't like, if you take it somewhere else, it's not worth anything unless people perceive it as valuable.
It's also scary to know that it won't be the same 12 years from now, like gold at least had this tangibility to it. Now, like, you hold a $1, it's not really going to be worth the same, or at least it'll be worth a different amount at like a faster rate than gold was perceived to be known. Like gold obviously had changes in value, like that's just how it works. You find more gold or gold disappears and then value changes. Due to the laws of scarcity and things like that. But I mean, we're going to tackle monetary systems probably in the future, but just letting you know that exists. But okay, going back to the gold standard. So the gold standard, I believe, was first implemented by England. All right, they got it down to pretty fine art in terms of weighing gold and keeping it to such a high standard, and the carats of the gold, they quite perfected it. And obviously the US just did US things and did it itself. Except until 1933. All right.
Ooh.
So let's talk about 1933 in a wider sense. So it was after World War I. All right. It was about 3 years into the Great Depression. So for those of you who don't know, Great Depression, it was a terrible economic crisis throughout the world, but also very much so in the US. From 1929 until 1939. So just before World War II. So I always think of it as that time after World War One, a little bit after World War One, and then pretty much directly before World War Two.
That's a really rough patch of years to go from the Great Depression right into World War Two.
Right into World War Two. I mean, that was a crazy time to be alive. But basically, 4,000 banks had failed in the 2 years preceding 1933. Okay, so banks failing is never a good sign for the economy. Let's not dig any deeper.
Was it because of economic reasons, or like they didn't have enough gold, or why did they fail in the first place?
It had nothing to do with gold. I mean, the Great Depression is just an economic shock. It was a great big market bubble, but that's something for a different time, right? The problem and that wasn't to do with gold, as far as I'm aware. The problem came when 4,000 banks failed. People don't want to put their money in banks. The banks are going to fail. It feels like every single bank is opening up and closing. That banks you've seen for years on your street don't exist anymore, right? And there were way more banks back in the day, so that was kind of probably part of the problem. But despite the Federal Reserve, another topic we can go into for those less economically inclined, the Federal Reserve made interest rates 25%. And what this means for an average person is they're incentivizing you to put your money in the bank. They're saying, hey, come, our prime interest rate is 25%. If you put it in our bank in a fixed deposit, like, you're going to be pretty much getting 25% thereabouts. Like, why aren't you putting your money in? You're losing money not being it. But reliability in the banking system had dropped to such a degree that wasn't working, right? And because the gold standard was implemented, people were going to banks, giving their $100 in, and saying, "Give me my ounces of gold."
I mean, yeah, why would you not at that point? Just bury it in your
Why?
backyard.
Exactly. I mean, why am I keeping my dollars if I could just have the gold standard, which is my gold, which is in the US Constitution? It said, there was a few lines there that said, this is gold, and it was this amount, that amount sometimes changed. But at that point, it was about $20, $20.50. Let's say $20.50. Okay, so it was a bank run, essentially. Banks were closing, people had no faith. They said, "Hey, give me my gold." This was a big problem because there was kind of not enough gold to go around, You think about liquidity. There wasn't really enough gold to give to everyone. Even though technically every dollar's backed by gold, there's still
logistical
you
issues
can't have
of getting it.
Logistical issues. Gold is heavy and you might not have enough of it, You don't make the system and assume everyone is just going to grab their dollars and head to the bank, and that bank will have that amount of gold, or there won't be that amount of gold in the system at all. So it was a big problem, and a lot of this times gold was used to settle international debts. So there was a debt crisis. Unemployment was at 25%. It was a pretty terrible time to be in the US, or pretty much just in the world. All right, so FDR just comes into office in 1933. He says, "I'm going to renew faith in our banking system." What follows is what is widely considered to be the greatest armed robbery in the history of the world, essentially. It's actually insane. It is very draconian. The Emergency Banking Act and the gold confiscation thereof. So FDR implements the Emergency Banking Act. All right, he orders. This is an order. This is a federal order for everyone with more than 5 ounces of gold to bring their gold and sell their gold at $20.50 to the nearest Federal Reserve Bank.
This is 1933?
1933, yeah.
So that's about like $500 today.
Yes, let's say that. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And if you don't, you will get like a minimum of 10 years in prison. I think there were some lighter penalties, but above 5 ounces. That's like a lot because people had a lot of gold. Naturally, there was a huge outcry. I'm sure there were riots in the streets, but I think people were in such dire straits that it probably didn't blow up as much as it would today. I mean, think about French protests. You could only imagine. Okay, so that was the first half of what's signed. People had to give up their gold. This is society. This is the first time societies have ever had to willingly give up, not willingly, forcefully given up their gold. There are cases of other civilizations throughout history where kings have done pretty much just the exact same thing. But the key part is the second step. All right. So everyone sells their gold back to the Federal Exchange. They get dollars. The next year, in 1934, all right, FDR transfers all of that gold to the US Treasury. All right. Oh. And now, through a flick of the pen, a signing of the paper, the Gold Reserve Act of 1934, he makes that gold that was sold to them at $20.67, $35. Simple as that.
Oh.
That equates to a 40% devaluation of the dollar to gold. So effectively, the US population lost 40% of the value of the dollars they held in their hands that day. I mean, it is quite scary to think how that would have affected a group of individuals.
And the Reserve just got a 40% profit.
Exactly. I mean, yeah. So you can see how some ancient civilizations might have done some scumming tactics like that. But this is the United States we're talking about. It's quite crazy. They then made Fort Knox. They then, and then so that was kind of the end of the strict gold standard. And strict gold standard is kind of what I've coined it. Was I could go to a bank, give in my dollar, get my gold. Now, after this happened, the Bretton Woods Agreement, which is something that happened after World War II, kind of took place, where 44 countries all agreed. They pretty much all agreed that they would not, value their currency to gold. But the US, they said we would value it to the United States dollar. But the United States can still peg their value of, dollars to gold. All right. So
Fascinating.
basically, it's very fascinating. So the world was pretty much still the gold standard because everyone was pegged to the United States dollar. That's where they derived their value from. But the United States dollar was still pegged to gold. So that's why I'm saying it's kind of like a half gold standard, That's why some texts disagree that I came across. They disagreed. They said, like, no, the gold standard was 1933 official claw, but effectively gold still was held in high regard. So the US had this large store of gold in its Fort Knox, but they pretty much only ever used the gold to settle big name lenders' debts or debts to like foreign investments or foreign reserve banks, essentially. So the gold was only ever used for big names, but it's still held like an incredible amount of value. But that value was still only $35 for an ounce, people, not 2,000 like it was today. And this is the entire world is being essentially pegged to an ounce of gold. All right. And I did mention this Bretton Woods Agreement. I just thought it was quite interesting. It's 44 countries. It was after World War II. The IMF and World Bank were also created at the Bretton Woods Agreement. And the idea that the US would peg their dollar to gold, and everyone else would peg it to the United States was kind of actually what was his first name? Keynes in economics. What was it? Martin?
Yes.
Remember that.
I think it's Keynes.
Was it Martin Keynes? Yeah, but what was his first name? I can't remember.
John Maynard Keynes.
Of course, John Maynard Keynes and Harry White, who was the chairman of the US Fed, actually came up with this, and it worked. It worked until 1971, until it failed. It was Nixon. It was Nixon, exactly. And I actually don't know many of the details, but it failed. And by 1973, Big Daddy IMF and World Bank declared that no one can peg their currency to gold. Yeah.
Probably for the best as well.
Yeah.
I think with the fact that currently, at the recording of this, there are banks that have failed, even without needing to oblige to a gold standard, that reintroducing, this gold equivalence would definitely not be a great idea. Liquidity issues would probably skyrocket regardless if they are now.
Yeah, like it's just incredible. Gold weighs a lot, man. This is one of the most dense materials on this earth. It is incredible. It is really incredible that such a history exists and such armed robbery, the biggest armed robbery in the world. That is incredible.
What's your key takeaway, I suppose, from like the research that you've done? Like, what are you going to go away with, thinking that is something that I didn't know before, and will probably stick with me for a while?
What I didn't know before, I didn't quite know the extent to which gold was so valuable in history,
right.
and so recently it was valuable. I thought it was valuable, but I thought it was like, hey, you had to take some gold, you put it in you bring it to someone, they say it's worth a lot, and that's kind of all I took from it. I did not think that, in 1970s, 1940s was pretty modern day. I didn't think it was so integral to like modern day, economics, but it was very important. I had no idea the gold standard exists. So that's kind of what I'd take away. I'd also take away that it's not worth as much as it should be. But maybe that's just my faulty thinking. Maybe we do need that. We do need that store of value. That value that will not go away. That value that will only increase because it will always be there.
This is a good question.
It's poetic.
Yeah. Like, if gold didn't exist, I'm sure we'd find some other like foundation to invest our money in when inflation gets high. But it's I think my key takeaway from this has definitely been such a fascination as you shared, that gold has been with us all the way from the beginnings of civilizations to the modern day. Like, it's accompanied us, held our hand, and in most cases we've had to rely upon it for such a long time, not only as a store of value, but just as a cultural and almost psychological identity. Like gold today is seen as this prized item. Gold-plated Rolexes, gold wrapping your car, gold wedding bands and stuff. It's quite crazy. Like we see gold, and without even thinking about it, it's just this little trigger in our brain that's just like...
is. Our monkey brains go crazy for it. There's no other explanation. There really is none. It's not objectively worth what it is, but it's worth that. And maybe that's the only objective standard we can ever rely upon for these kind of things.
I think that's a great note to leave this episode on. Take it for yourselves. What does gold mean to you, dear listeners? And if you had the choice, would you bring back the gold standard? I'm sure that's not going to cause any controversy. Yeah, I think that's been us.
Yeah, it just about does it, I'm sure.
Yeah, hopefully wealth has been told a little bit more. And thank you for listening. Please do like and comment and share the podcast if you did enjoy, and if you can, leave us a comment on what we should tackle next, or something that you're curious about. We'd love to check it out, and maybe we'll also have a bit of a spark of curiosity as well. Yeah, that's been me, Vince Balak.
And me, Devon Murphy.
And this has been Untold World.